Hey guys, tonight we slip back into a world lit only by flame, where stone walls echo with the hush of velvet and whispers of conspiracy. You're standing in the shadowy corridor of a medieval castle, chilled air brushing your ankles, the scent of beeswax and wood smoke wrapping around you like a tired old blanket. A torch flickers on the wall, casting wobbly shadows on an ancient tapestry that probably hasn't been cleaned since the last jousting tournament. Ahead lies a thick oak, door barely cracked open, and beyond it, the deep, guttural snores of a king. He dreams while others scheme. You step lightly, careful not to wake the man who, just this morning, ordered a siege over a spilled goblet. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're feeling brave, post your location and local time in the comments. Let's see who else is awake at this ridiculous hour. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You enter the king's chamber. It's colder than you expected. The air tastes like damp limestone and old wool. Tapestries hang like frozen waterfalls, and at the center of the room, upon a raised platform, lies the Beda, towering wooden contraption that creaks every time the monarch rolls his considerable bulk over. Feather mattresses weren't standard fare for everyone, but a king, he's sleeping on goose down thicker than a monk's scripture pile. But don't be fooled. Royal sleep wasn't all luxury. The mattress mid had been stuffed with softest fluff, but the drafts in these castles could freeze your moustache off, and there was always the danger of being murdered in your sleep by a cousin with delusions of grandeur. Sleep, for a medieval king, was never just sleep. It was a nightly gamble between comfort and conspiracy. Take King Henry I, for instance. He had a habit of keeping his chamber doors barred from the inside, not to keep people out, but to prevent overly helpful servants from walking in while he or napped. He once fell asleep mid-council, and when he woke, he declared war on Wales. Coincidence? Probably, but historians still argue whether that dozy moment was divine inspiration or diplomatic sleepwalking. Across the Channel, in the misty heart of the Holy Roman Empire, emperors tried to outdo each other in bed size and quantity of pelts. You'd think these men were preparing to hibernate. Charlemagne reportedly had an entire menagerie of exotic skins on his bed. Leopards, lions, even a very unfortunate giraffe hide. And yet his chroniclers noted he often slept lightly, always ready to leap into his cold armor at the first clang of a bell. Probably explains the dark circles under his eyes on all those coins. And what of the noise? Castles were not peaceful. Moaning winds, clattering hooves, servants arguing 2 floors down. And don't even get started on the owl infestation in some turrets. To help with that, kings sometimes had musicians play soft lute music at bedtime. Others preferred droning prayers from personal chaplains. One particularly fussy French king insisted on the sound of running water to lull him to sleep, leading to the invention of the medieval indoor fountain, which worked surprisingly well until it flooded the queen's bed. And then there was the night watch. In theory, guards patrolled the corridors to keep the king safe. In reality, half of them dozed off, leaning on halberds. That's why some kings posted loyal dogs at the foot of their beds. Real dogs, big ones, trained not to bark at every creak, but just enough to discourage poisoned goblets and throat-slitting attempts. The royal pug had not yet entered the scene. The temperature, meanwhile, required some tactical layering. Even with tapestries and braziers, winter nights could bite. Kings often slept in fur-lined nightshirts, woolen socks, and occasionally their crowns, which sounds ridiculous until you remember the rumor that Louis II believed removing his crown would invite assassination in his dreams. Historians still argue whether this was royal superstition or just an elaborate bedtime flex. And what dreams these men must have had. Battles won and lost. Political alliances forged over sleepovers with other monarchies. That happened. Diplomatic slumber parties weren't unheard of. Kings would literally share beds to prove trust, especially in Chile northern courts, where sleeping apart was simply too cold and too suspicious. Nothing says no hard feelings like spooning your rival under a boar-hide blanket. A lesser-known tradition involved dream interpretation. Court astrologers and monks often stood by to hear a king's dream at dawn and give it mystical meaning. Ah, your grace dreamt of geese flying backward. Clearly a sign we should double the grain tax. No one dared argue. and if the dream was particularly ominous, the whole court might fast for a week or cancel a war. Dreams weren't just dreams, there were state policy. Meanwhile, he crouched quietly behind a velvet-draped chair, watching this slumbering sovereign snort softly. His beard twitches. Maybe he's dreaming of a hunt, or a peasant revolt, or just a really excellent meat pie. A scribe dozes in the corner with quill still in hand, and a guard nods off by the door, dreaming of retirement. The fire pops gently. You pull your cloak tighter. One log shifts, and for a moment the flames illuminate the face of the king, a man who rules lands and people, but who, like everyone else, is ultimately just a snoring mortal with cold feet and too many worries to count. Sleep comes slowly here, like politics, like winter, and while kings might command armies and coin, they can't summon sleep on command. They wait, and worry, and drift, sometimes into peace, sometimes into prophecy. Tonight, you are safe, if a little chilly, beside the crackling hearth and the rustling curtains. So rest, because tomorrow, this king might ride to war, but tonight, he dreams. You're still here, half curled in that velvet-draped chair, and the king is still snoring, his breath rising in misty little clouds. The fire's gone to embers now, but you're not quite ready to move. That's fine. There's another king to visit tonight, and this one. He's a legend, he's a lawmaker. He single quotes S... a bit of a bed hoarder. Welcome to the 8th century court of Charlemagne. Yes, that's Charlemagne, the guy who stitched together half of Europe, invented royal schools, and somehow still found time to sleep. Though, judging by the accounts, he didn't do much of that either. He shuffled into his quarters, where the tapestries are thicker, the scrolls taller, and the draft just as icy. Charlemagne didn't sleep like a modern man. No midnight snacks, no silk pajamas, no 10-step skin routine. According to his biographer Einhard, the emperor preferred simple bedding, but what passed as simple for Charlemagne would be a fur-piled wonderland to anyone else. He slept on animals' skins, bear, wolf, sometimes lion, not because he was edgy, but because they were warm and, well, intimidating. Imagine breaking into a tent and finding the emperor sleeping under what used to be the apex predator of the Caucasus. Not exactly inviting. One chronicler even swore that he had a bed stuffed with eagle feathers, though historians still argue whether that's true or just a poetic exaggeration. Either way, soft. The emperor didn't sleep alone. No scandal, just practicalities. His children often bunked nearby, along with scribes, guards, and at times, visiting nobles. His bedchamber was more of a tactical dormitory than a private nest. Charlemagne liked his inner circle close, very close. That way, if he woke up inspired or paranoid, he could issue an order before his feet hit the floor. Think of it like sleep texting, but with parchment and shouting. His nights were broken, too. He'd rise to pray in the dark hours, pacing barefoot across stone floors that probably felt like glacier runoff. Some claim he could recite entire psalms, while others suggest he simply mumbled and hoped no one noticed. One monk observed him praying with his eyes closed and mouth open. So, maybe less spiritual, more snoring. You glance at the nearby wall, where a map of the empire is scratched into wood with deliberate fury. Over it hangs a sword belt, polished to perfection. In the corner, his boots sit like sleeping hounds ready to be worn at a moment's notice. Because when you govern an empire that stretches from the Pyrenees to the Danube, you don't exactly get to sleep in. Still, for all his wakefulness, Charlemagne wasn't joyless. He had a soft spot for music, harp and flute, mostly, and would sometimes invite bards to lull him with old Frankish ballads, the kind that stretch endlessly, with 5 verses for every sheep you were trying to count. And here's your fringe fact for the night. One bard claimed to have written a sleep song so effective that Charlemagne fell asleep in under 30 seconds, and then banned the tune because it made him miss an important envoy. Power move. Despite all his power and ritual, his nightly routine was surprisingly grounded. A goblet of warm wine, a whispered prayer, and the same old skin blanket. No golden pajamas, no sycophantic lullabies. He once joked at least according to a monk with a dramatic pen, that even emperors have cold toes. Still, sleep was serious business. Dreams, especially. Charlemagne recorded them carefully, asking monks to interpret them before breakfast. One dream about a crumbling cathedral supposedly triggered a building spree that gave us the famous Palatine Chapel. Another dream involved a blue dragon fighting a still argue whether that one was political metaphor or bad venison stew. What's undeniable is that Charlemagne saw sleep not as a retreat, but a battlefield of its own. In sleep, he believed, came divine instruction or, just as likely, demonic mischief. That's why incense often burned through the night in his quarters, a hazy line of defense against unholy nightmares. A lot of coughing, but very few demons. Even the bed itself was political. When visiting lords slept in the emperor's guest chambers, they would report back on everything: the firmness of the mattress, the scent of the linens, even the temperature of the chamber pots. Diplomacy, medieval style. One misstepper, drafty room, a lumpy catand, you might just trigger a minor rebellion. Your eyes drift to the foot of the emperor's bed. There, a leather-bound book rests, its spine cracked with use. A psalter, perhaps, or a book of laws. Charlemagne supposedly liked to fall asleep reviewing legislation. That's right. Your man drafted the foundations of European feudalism as a bedtime routine. Some people count sheep. Some people reorganize tax codes. To each his own. Now, listen. Can you hear it? A faint sigh, a creak of wood, the distant stomp of horses being resaddled before dawn. Charlemagne turns beneath his bare skins, murmurs something about Aachen and wheat prices, and settles back into sleep, or something like it. Tomorrow, he'll hold court, decree reforms, maybe invent a few new titles for himself. But tonight, he's simply Charles the Sleeper, another mortal under a sky of cold stars. You rise, gently, tiptoeing past fur and parchment, letting the quiet settle over you like one of his heavy cloaks. The torchlight dances one last time on the carved beams above his bed, and then you're gone, slipping through the curtain of time, onward to the next sleepless throne. You slip through time like a breeze under a drafty castle door. The musty scent of old parchment fades, and in its place comes the salt-sweet air of the English coast. The stone beneath your feet feels heavier now, freshly quarried, not yet worn smooth by generations of pacing nobles. It's the 11th century, and tonight you're headed to the chambers of William the Conqueror. Though peaceful might not be the word for what you're about to find. This isn't the sleep of a contented monarch. This is the tossing, mumbling, he might be right. William's bedchamber is carved into the thick heart of a new fortress, austere, and very much not the cute fairy tale sort. The walls sweat with sea fog, and there's always the faint scent of roasted meat drifting in from some distant hall. But William's too tense to notice. You hover by the stone archway, watching as he lies rigid atop a coarse linen sheet, fully dressed but for his boots. You read that, right? The man sleeps dressed, or half-dressed, depending on how you define sleep. There are accounts no doubt embellished by monastic drama. Queen Zat William sometimes rested on a wooden bench rather than a bed, sword within reach. Sleep is for Saxons, he supposedly once grunted. Historians still argue whether that's a real quote or medieval propaganda, but it feels true, doesn't it? You take a few cautious steps in. His bed is plain, oak frame, wool-stuffed mattress, rough wool blankets, no gold thread embroidery here. This was a man forged on campaign, who once crossed the English Channel with half a kingdom in his pocket and a full-size siege plan under his helmet. His nights, even now, are more about surviving than snoozing, and yet he tries. Some nights, a bowl of warm ale with spices sits on the bedside stool, poor man's potion for dreamless sleep. Other nights, a monk reads to him from scripture or court records. One particularly wild rumor claims he once fell asleep during the reading of his own coronation oath. If true, that's either peak confidence or extreme exhaustion, or both. Then there's the roast goose incident, a fringe account preserved in a half-faded monastery. Journal describes William waking in the middle of the night after a nightmare involving a goose, a crown, and a burning tapestry. He apparently insisted the bird had spoken Latin. The next morning, roast goose was removed from the castle kitchens for a full month. Coincidence? Maybe, but you don't risk poultry-based prophecies when your hold on England is still a bit wobbly. You hear him now, a low grumble, like a man chewing through strategy in his dreams. He mutters names: Herald, Rebellion. You swear his hand twitches toward the dagger beside him. The truth is, William slept like a soldier. He never lost the edge. The conquest didn't end when the last Saxon banner fell. It kept going. One tax roll, one rebellion, one haunted night at a time. And it haunted him. There are quiet references, subtle lines in the Anglo-Saxon chronicle that suggest the king was often ill at ease. Not just in public, but alone, in these cold rooms, staring up at the cracked ceiling beams, listening for the creak of betrayal. You glance at the hearth. It's barely embers now. Fires weren't kept roaring in royal rooms all night. Wood was precious, and paranoia burned hotter than flame. Instead, there are dogs curled at the foot of his bed. Norman warhounds. One opens an eye as you pass, and lets out a long, suspicious sigh. The dogs seen things, and the guards are. The guards. William didn't trust anyone to guard him but his own loyal Norman soldiers. No Saxons, ever. They rotated every few hours, even at night. Legend has it he had a secret signal, a single knock on the wall that meant draw your swords. No one wanted to find out what happened if you missed it. Tonight, though, it's quiet. The guards stand firm. The dogs are still, and William's breathing settles into something like rhythm. Still heavy, still uneasy, but slower now. Maybe he's dreaming of Normandy, of beaches and hawks, and a simpler time when he only had to conquer one country. Or maybe he's dreaming of that tapestry. You know the one, the Bayeux Tapestry, the ultimate medieval graphic novel. All 230 feet of it, embroidered with horses, swords, ships, and somewhere in the middle, a little depiction of William sleeping. Well, not quite. But wouldn't it be something if they'd stitched in a single panel of him napping, mouth agape, dog on his foot, drooling just a little? You suppress a laugh. It would have humanized the conqueror. Instead, history remembers him as stern, calculating, relentless, the man who never stopped moving. And yet here he lies, still and breathing, for just a few hours. Even kings need sleep, however warlike their dreams. You linger a moment longer, listening to the wind push against the tower walls. The kind of wind that makes you wonder whether the sea is angry or just whispering in an old language. It rattles the shutters slightly, and William stirs but doesn't wake. You leave quietly, stepping backward out of the room like someone trying not to wake a sleeping bear. Outside, the moon glints off the keepstone towers, and you swear it looks just a little like a helmet turned sideways. You smile. Onward. There are more royal dreams to visit tonight. The night thickens, and the wind changes. You've wandered through the cold, stony beds of conquerors, through the austere chambers of men who ruled with steel in their fists. But now, your footsteps soften. The floors beneath you are smoother, warmer. The torches burn lower here, more golden than harsh. You're still in a castle. Yes, but not one built entirely for war. This is the bedchamber of Queen Eleanor of Aquitaine and King Henry II. And the bed is political. You paused in the shadows, the scent of rosewater drifting faintly through the air. A harp somewhere, faint, finishes a gentle note and fades into silence. And there, amid embroidered pillows and tapestries of hunting scenes, lie two of the most cunning minds in medieval Europe, though. Calling it resting might be generous. They're not asleep. Not yet. Eleanor, regal, even in repose, reclines with her hands folded, her eyes half-lidded, but very much alert. Henry, sprawled beside her, has the look of a man whose thoughts are moving faster than his body. They aren't talking at the moment, but they have. Oh, they've talked. You can still feel it in the air. Arguments spun like chessmen, flirtation sharpened into veiled threats, kingdom-spanning strategies mapped out between sheets. This bed-wide, draped, perfumed has heard more diplomacy than half the royal courts in Europe. Eleanor doesn't sleep like a queen from a storybook. She sleeps like a woman who has survived 2 kings, a crusade, and at least 1 attempted kidnapping. Her nightgown, though soft, is layered enough to ride out of a window if things go south. And Henry, he sleeps with his boots within reach, not because he's afraid, because he's always ready to ride. Now, let's address the royal elephant in the room. Married monarchs didn't often sleep together, but Eleanor and Henry, they broke rules. Sometimes together, often apart, but always with flair. Their relationship was ... complex, politically fruitful, emotionally volcanic. Eleanor had once been Queen of France. Then she was Queen of England, and now she lies here, next to Henry, a man she both adored and, let's be honest, probably wanted to smother with a pillow on certain nights. Still, these two made it work sort of, at least long enough to produce 8 children, including Richard the Lionheart and John Le. Historians still argue whether those children were products of affection, ambition, or just a truly persistent dynastic schedule. But back to the bed. Eleanor, as Duchess of Aquitaine, was used to luxury. Her sleep was scented, curated, guarded. In her court, troubadours were trained to sing lullabies with lyrics about virtue, chivalry, and yes, when she married Henry, she brought that court culture with her. Suddenly, the English crown had pillows with fleur-de-lis embroidery and scandalous bedtime poetry floating through the halls. Henry, however, was famously restless. Even in his 50s, he would ride 30 miles in a day and still argue tax reform by firelight. He once fell asleep dictating a letter, only to wake mid-sentence and continue without missing a beat. That's not sleep, that's political stamina with a nap button. Some nights, Eleanor would leave him to his parchments and retire to her own chamber. But on the nights she stayed, well, let's just say the bed was never just for sleeping. They debated here, plotted here, maybe even forgave each other here, briefly, before remembering whose cousin had betrayed whom. And that brings us to one of tonight's more amusing tidbits. One court account claims that Eleanor once refused to sleep with Henry for 40 days over a disagreement about land in Anjou. During this bed boycott, she composed poems, long, pointed poems, about stubborn lions and foolish stags. The implication was, ... not subtle. It worked. The land deal got adjusted. The bed, you see, was not a place of rest. It was a negotiation table, a stage, a confessional booth, at times even a battlefield. And Henry knew it. That's why he kept maps by the bedside. Maps and letters. If he woke with a solution, he wanted it written down by dawn. Eleanor preferred candlelight and parchment scented with lavender. Henry preferred to chew on reeds and bark orders at groggy scribes. And yet somehow it balanced. Or at least, it didn't collapse. Now, listen. Their breathing has changed. Slower. Still separate, but moving in rhythm. There's a space between them wide enough for a scroll, perhaps, but they are together. Henry twitches once, murmuring something about rebels in Wales. Eleanor rolls over, her arm brushing his, her fingers curling slightly, like she might steal a piece of him in her sleep. You glance at the walls. Painted stars glint faintly above the bed. One tapestry shows a lion curled beside a hawk's strange bedfellows, but oddly peaceful. That's what this is. Peace. Fragile, temporary, royal. And yet, outside this chamber, the world plots. Eleanor's sons will soon rise against their father. She'll be Henry will die alone, but not tonight. Tonight, they rest, uneasily, suspiciously, but side by side. And as you step back into the corridor, the soft sound of Eleanor exhaling behind you, you realize that not all royal sleep is about war, or fear, or scheming. Sometimes, it's just the pause before the next blow lands. Onward. The castle corridors narrow, twist, and dim as you walk. Stone gives way to sand-colored earth, and before you know it, the chill of England and France melts into a dry, desert heat. The air smells of dust and sweat, mingled with a hint of sandalwood. Somewhere nearby, a camel groans, indignant, and the distant clang of armor rings through the night like someone arguing with a bell. You've arrived in the Holy Land. It's the late 12th century, and a crusade is underway. But you're not here for battles or banners. You're here for a glimpse into a different kind of royal sleep, the kind taken under stars instead of stone, with danger crouching behind every palm tree. You're here to watch Richard I of England, better known as Richard the Lionheart, try to sleep in a world that doesn't let kings rest. His tent is enormous. Of course it is. The guy is called Lionheart. Even when he's half a world away from his palace, he needs his signature flair. The outer fabric flutters gently in the night breeze, and you duck through the folds, brushing past a layer of heavy embroidered canvas. Inside, the air is thick with heat and candle wax. Richard lies sprawled across a cot that looks far too narrow for a man with his reputation. One leg dangles off the edge, and his tunic is unlaced at the throat, damp from the day's heat. You half expect him to leap up, shout something about Saracens, and start swinging a sword at shadows. But not tonight. He's motionless, his brow furrowed, as if his dreams are still commanding troops. Crusader sleep was rarely peaceful. Between the heat, the endless march of ants, and the ever-present threat of assassination, most kings barely managed to nap without a blade nearby. Richard, however, made something of a performance out of it. He often slept with his sword beside him, sometimes under him. If the rumors are true, and would reportedly rehearse speeches or dictate letters until he quite literally fell asleep mid. A chronicler once described him sleeping like a lion guarding a bone, which either meant he was fiercely protective or just really bad at sharing the covers. Historians still argue whether this image was flattery or frustration. Some poor scribe having to yank a royal scroll out from under the king's snoring head. And speaking of scrolls, you spot one now, crumpled beside the cot. It's a map of Jerusalem, smooched, annotated. Someone's drawn a little doodle in the corner, a stick figure with a crown and a very dramatic sword. You're not saying it was Richard, but, well, it was Richard. Despite his warlike nature, Richard wasn't completely opposed to comfort. When camped near major cities, he'd sometimes arrange for fine linens to be brought in, and he had a particular fondness for citrus-scented oils. Practical, to citrus helped keep the fleas off. He was no fool. You can't win a siege if you're too itchy to focus. He also had a thing for palm wine, just a cup, maybe two, before bed. Not enough to dull his edge, just enough to soften the edges of the day. Some nights, after a skirmish or a particularly awkward negotiation with his French allies, he'd pace the perimeter of his camp barefoot, then return and collapse without so much as removing his chainmail undershirt. Yes, he sometimes slept in partial armor, not for fashion, for safety. An assassin nearly got him once, slipped into the tent pretending to be a servant. After that, Richard added 2 layers of guard rotation and insisted on sleeping with a dagger tucked under his pillow, the same pillow he'd later hurl at his brother John in a dream-induced fit of rage. That's the fringe tidbit of the night. A soldier's journal recounts the king muttering, "You'll never be king," before chucking a feather pillow across the tent and knocking over a lamp. Fire was promptly extinguished. No kingdoms were harmed. Tonight, though, he sleeps, or tries to. You can hear the rustle of his fingers against the coarse fabric of the cot, the way his breath catches now and then like someone who's halfway between a dream and a memory. Maybe he's thinking of England, or Cyprus, or the time he casually conquered a castle because someone insulted his horse. Or maybe he's reliving Acre. That siege, that bloody grind through heat and disease, it lived with him, haunted him, some said. And though Richard never confessed to fear, it's hard to ignore the way he clenched his fists in sleep after a hard campaign, the sort of grip that left little half-moons from his fingernails in the palms of his hands. You peer closer. His lips move slightly. A name, a prayer, it's hard to tell, and just beside him, a book of Psalms lies open. Not the whole Bible, just the comfort bits. A monk once claimed that Richard had memorized 3 favorite verses and would whisper them when the desert winds howled loudest. Was it faith, habit, or just a wish for peace? The guards outside shuffle. Someone clears their throat, but inside the tent, the air is still, quiet, heavy, with a kind of forced peace. This isn't the slumber of victory or safety. It's the sleep of a man who knows the battle never really stops. It just pauses. And in that pause, he dreams. You step out of the Crusader camp and back into the cool hush of Europe, but something feels ... off. The wind is wrong. The stars tilt slightly. Even the shadows seem to twitch. You're in France now. But this isn't the wine and waltz sort of royal court. This is the court of King Charles VI, also known as Charles the Madden. Sleep here is a dangerous, unpredictable thing. You're going to want to tread lightly. It's the late 14th century, and you're inside the labyrinthian palace of St. where whispers bounce off every gilded surface, and nothing is quite as it seems. You slip past silent courtiers and tense guards, past murals of saints with suspiciously wary eyes, until you reach the royal bed. You expect grandeur, of course, and it's there. Silk draperies, an oversized featherbed, elaborate carpets from Damascus, but also chains. There, bolted into the corners of the room, are discreet iron loops, not decorative, functional, because sometimes the king doesn't sleep like other kings. Charles V suffers from fits episodes where he forgets who he is, where he is, what a king even means. He's known to run through the corridors shrieking that he's made of glass, and when sleep comes, it's not always kind. Tonight, his attendants have given him a draught mix of poppy milk, honey, and crushed rose petals. It's supposed to calm him. Sometimes it works. Sometimes he dreams of fire and wakes up convinced the world is burning. You're standing in the corner now, watching as Charles breathes shallowly beneath a mountain of silk and linen. His bed is enormous, though not out of luxury. It's to give him space during his fits, to keep attendants from being accidentally kicked or clawed in the night. A physician sits nearby with a candle, eyes fixed on the king's face, waiting, just in case. It wasn't always like this. Charles once slept soundly. As a boy, His dreams were full of pageants and tournaments. He loved colors, music, pageantry. His bed was once a stage for royal plaything, kind of lavish show that involved reciting bedtime poetry while pages fluffed embroidered pillows shaped like but something shifted after his 20s. The madness came suddenly, terrifyingly, and from that moment on, sleep became a battle. And here's your fringe fact of the night. Once, during an episode, Charles insisted he was St. George. He donned armor over his nightclothes, mounted a wooden hobby horse, and tried to defend his own throne room. It took 6 knights and 2 royal hounds to restrain him. The hobby horse was decapitated. No further comment. Historians still argue whether Charles's illness was hereditary, the result of mercury treatments, or the stress of governing a fractured France. Whatever the cause, his nights became riddled with fear, both his and everyone else's. Courtiers began sleeping in shifts, rotating through his chamber to monitor his breathing, his muttering, his sudden jerks awake. The French court, obsessed with omens and symbolism, began reading his dreams like sacred texts. One record notes a dream he had in 1394. White bull with burning eyes chased him through a hedge maze while children laughed in the distance. A cleric claimed it meant he would lose Normandy. A jester claimed it meant he needed better cheese. Even his bed changed with time. At one point, it was rumored that the mattress had been blessed by no fewer than 4 bishops. Another rumor suggests that it was secretly stuffed with mandrake root and bits of unicorn horn. You know, just in case the devil was hiding in the headboard. But despite all the madness, there were still moments, tiny, fragile slivers of peace, when Charles simply slept. Tonight, you may be lucky enough to witness one. He exhales, and the physician relaxes slightly. A page turns over a sand glass. The candles flame, gutters and flares. The king murmurs something. Le forêt, plus profonde. The deep forest. Maybe he's dreaming of a hunt, or a memory from boyhood, chasing birds in the woods before madness entered his life, like a smoke through a crack in the wall. His wife, Queen Isabeau, used to sleep nearby, but no more. Not since the fits worsened. Now she rests 2 wings away, with locks on her door and guards who don't ask questions. Love had no room in this sick-room palace of dread. Affection gave way to ritual. Trust gave way to silence. And yet, Charles dreams. He stirs. His fingers flex. You see the hint of a smile, not peaceable, exactly, but softer than you expected. He might not know he's a king right now. He might think he's a boy in the woods, or a knight in shining glass armor. But for this one moment, the nightmare is quiet. You draw back into the shadows. The physician nods off in his chair. A torch outside the chamber flickers against the stone. Somewhere deeper in the palace, a door creaks slow, haunted, deliberate. But here, in this strange and heavy stillness, Charles sleeps. Not soundly, not safely, but sleep all the same. You turn to leave. The madness may wait just beyond the edge of the dream, curled like smoke. But for now it doesn't enter. You breathe out, onward. The corridors darken again, and the air turns damp. Not the clean, brisk dampness of rain or riverbanks. This is the thick, sour damp of something gone wrong. A castle, yes, but the mood has shifted. Outside, a bell tolls soft, slow, and too many times for comfort. You'll count them. 12, then 13. Someone has miscounted, or perhaps time itself is unraveling here. You're in England once more. The year is 1349, and the Black Death is not just a rumor anymore, it's inside the castle walls. Tonight, King Edward III lies awake in his private quarters, and no one dares knock. This is not a good night. It hasn't been a good year. You creep inside his chamber. The fire is lit, but does nothing to warm the room. Tapestries have been removed, burned, some sub air, because they were suspected of harboring the plague. The windows are shuttered. The incense is overwhelming, as if the court priests thought they could smoke the illness out like a rat in a pantry. Edward lies rigid on the bed, his hands clasped over his chest, not in prayer but tension. His eyes are open. He's not asleep. He's pretending. The king is trying to rest, but death scratches at the door like a stray dog with a grudge. Nearly half the country is dying. Entire villages wiped away like smudges from a ledger. And in this castle, this carefully guarded island of privileged servants, cough in corners, and physicians whisper about bad airs, and humors, as if naming the thing will make it polite. Sleep, under these conditions, is less of a necessity and more of an act of defiance. Edward tries anyway. A bowl of crushed lavender and vinegar sits by the bedside, some kind of medieval air purifier. There's a lemon, too, just sitting there. One physician believed citrus repelled infection. Another claimed the king should sleep with onions in his boots. You glance at the floor. No onions. He's picking his battles. Here's your fringe tidbit of the night. One noble insisted that sleeping with a live chicken on your chest could prevent plague. Another argued for crushed emeralds in your pillowcase. Historians still argue whether Edward actually tried either, though one record does suggest his chamberlain briefly acquired a crate of enchanted poultry. It was returned the next day. Apparently, they wouldn't stay still. The bed itself is grand canopied, her back heavy with curtains to block out the pestilence. But what good are curtains against an invisible foe? Edward used to sleep soundly here. This was the bed where he dreamed of Calais, of jousts and victory parades, of banners flapping in the wind and trumpets blaring. Now he dreams of coughing, of blackened skin, of mass graves. He turns suddenly, pulling the blanket higher. His beard brushes against the linen freshly changed, probably the only fresh thing left in this part of the kingdom. Somewhere nearby, a priest mutters prayers in Latin. You don't need to speak it to know they're not cheerful. Edward's thoughts are loud tonight. You can feel them. He has buried one daughter already, Joan, age 15, struck down while traveling to her betrothed in Spain. The ink on the marriage treaty wasn't even dry. Her death arrived by ship, by breath, by fate. He'd wept privately and then resumed ruling, because kings don't have time to break. And yet, here he is, curled on one side, waiting for sleep or mercy. Outside the room, his advisors are likely arguing about quarantines, grain stores, and whether or not to cancel Parliament again. One even suggested suspending royal hunts. That's how bad it is. Sleep eludes everyone in this castle. Guards nod off leaning on spears. Servants dose themselves with wine and hope. Edward, though, he lies still, blinking at nothing, hearing everything. A candle gutters, the incense thickens, and finally he exhales a long, slow breath and closes his eyes. His face softens, just slightly. Maybe he's not dreaming of death tonight. Maybe it's the sea, or his youth, or his first coronation robe, stiff with gold and entirely too itchy. The Black Death changed the world, but in this moment, it pauses. Even plague must rest. Edward shifts. A threadbare stuffed hawk, something his daughter once gave him, falls from the pillow to the floor. He doesn't notice. He's under now. Not deeply, not safely, but enough. And what does a king dream in a dying kingdom? Historians still argue whether Edward saw this time as divine punishment, political misstep, or just tragedy. But tonight, he dreams like any man, burdened with too much, drifting through a fog of regrets and records, of battles won and children lost. You step back from the bedside. The walls of the chamber seem to close in behind you, like the castle itself is holding its breath. As you slip through the heavy oak door, you hear a raven croak from the ramparts. But inside that room, for a little while longer, a king sleeps. Stone arches rise again around you, this time grander, taller, as if carved by ambition itself. You've crossed into the 16th century, now Renaissance England, where everything is gilded, perfumed, exaggerated. The corridors widen, the candlelight is warmer, and the bed... Oh, you're not ready for the bed. You're entering the royal apartments of King Henry VIII. Yes, that Henry the One with 6 wives, a rapidly expanding wit, and a talent for executing anyone who mildly irritated him before breakfast. And yet, despite the royal temper tantrums, power plays, and total rebranding of English religion, Henry still had to do what every monarch must eventually do: lie down and try to sleep. You push open the door to his private rooms, and immediately your senses are overwhelmed. The ceiling looms high overhead, hand-painted with celestial scenes. Angels flutter in the corners, eternally gazing downward, as if judging Henry's every snore. The scent of rose oil, beeswax, and roasted game lingers in the air like a poorly ventilated dinner party. And the bed, it's massive, larger than most modern hot tubs. Carved oak, intricately decorated, draped in crimson velvet and ermine. A fortress disguised as a mattress, the kind of bed that requires 3 footstools and a prayer to mount properly. Henry lies sprawled in the middle like a felled oak, one arm across his chest, the other flung wide as if he's fending off a ghost or summoning one. His chest rises and falls heavily. You'd think a man with absolute power might sleep more peacefully. You'd be wrong. See, Henry didn't rest easy. His dreams were cluttered with guilt, gout, and ex-wives, some dead, some exiled, all a little opinionated. By the time he was in his 40s, sleep had become complicated. Physically, he was plagued by ulcers, leg pain, and a growing difficulty with movement. Mentally, he was plagued by, well, just about everything. And here's your quirky tidbit for tonight. One court physician once claimed Henry insisted on sleeping surrounded by orange peels because he believed the citrus warded off melancholy vapors. Another swore that the king's pillows were stuffed with swan feathers and dried lavender, though historians still argue whether this was medical advice or just Henry being extra. When he did sleep, he snored like a war drum. Accounts describe it as a thunderous rumble, fit to rattle pewter. Servants had to rotate night shifts every 2 days just to avoid developing permanent ear damage. One unfortunate page supposedly went temporarily deaf after sharing a wall with the king's chamber during a particularly pork-heavy week. And still, the bed was never truly empty. Henry often insisted on company in the hours before sleep, courtiers reading him dispatches, musicians playing soft lute music, and occasionally his fool, Will Summers, muttering half-jokes about wives and waste. Will was one of the only people who could tease Henry without, losing his head. But tonight, Henry lies alone. Well, not alone exactly. A massive mastiff, curled at the foot of the bed, lifts one droopy eyelid as you pass. The dog's name is either Caesar or Solomon, depending on which decade of Henry's reign you've landed in. Either way, he's a good boy and seems unbothered by the royal wheezing. Tonight is one of Henry's quieter nights. No arguments, no messengers, no Anne Boleyn to accuse, no Jane Seymour to mourn. Just the dull ache in his leg and the thick, syrupy sleep of someone exhausted by power. He turns slightly, and you hear him mumble something. France, maybe he's dreaming of glory, of the Battle of the Spurs, of the time he still cut a dashing figure in armor, back when people painted him slim and victorious and golden, before the double chins, before the betrayals. You scan the chamber. Letters sit unopened on the writing desk. A prayer book lies face down, spine cracked, on a stool near the bed. An ornate goblet still holds a little honeyed wine, his nighttime comfort. Not too much, though Henry hated feeling fuzzy. He wanted control, even in dreams. And oh, the dreams. He once confessed to Archbishop Cranmer that he dreamt of wolves with his wives' voices, circling a throne that kept sinking into the mud. Whether this was prophecy, indigestion, or poetic license, no one's sure. But that image haunted him. Sometimes he'd wake sweating and demand mass at 3 a.m., just in case God was keeping track. Historians still argue whether Henry truly believed in his divine right, or if he just shouted it loud enough that even he was convinced. But in this chamber, with the fire low and the shadows long, you see something different. Not a tyrant, not a legend, just a very tired man, heavy with age and consequence, clinging to a few hours of escape. He exhales, and for a moment, the snoring stops. His hand twitches, maybe reaching for a phantom hand, maybe dismissing a bad dream. His crown, polished and terrifying, rests on a stand nearby. He doesn't sleep with it. No one does, but it sits close, always within reach. You step back, the thick velvet carpet muffling your movement. The mastiff shifts, then settles. Outside, the wind rustles. The banners above Hampton Court. The country waits for decisions, for orders, for mercy. But none of that matters right now. For just this hour, the king sleeps. The walls grow quieter as you pass through them. Velvet turns to tapestries, wood to colder stone. The pageantry of the Tudors fades like a tired dream, and now the light thins grayer, more austere. You've reached the early 17th century, and everything feels restrained, tighter, almost puritanical. You're now in the royal residence of James VI, and I King of Scotland and England both, a man united by crowns and divided by night terrors. Tonight, you walk in the dim halls of Whitehall Palace, and they're still, the kind of still that feels like it's waiting to be broken, a quiet born of tension, not peace. You reach the door of James's private bedchamber, and surprise it's locked. Not for your benefit, of course. James often insisted his chambers be bolted from the inside at night, despite her, perhaps, because of being king. You slip in through another wall, because, well, you're you, and what you find inside is not exactly royal glamour. It's cluttered. Scrolls, books, letters, piles of them stacked on chairs and tables. The fire is crackling low, a perfumed branch of juniper laid across the coals. The bed is modest compared to Henry's overcompensating luxury. Four-posted, yes, but narrow, practical, and fitted with heavy drapes. James often kept tightly closed. The man valued privacy the way some people value oxygen. And there he is, James himself, burrowed deep under layers of wool and linen like a startled owl. The only visible part of him is a tangled tuft of beard above the blanket line, moving slightly with each careful breath. You can almost hear the echo of the court physician's warnings. Keep warm, Your Majesty, or the phlegm will seize your lungs. James was famously sickly, not quite the Victorian romantic consumptive, but certainly the kind of king who lived life wrapped in scarves, dosed in herbs, and perpetually certain he was dying. He carried dried orange peel in little pouches and slept in nightcaps soaked in vinegar to combat the fog of London. One fringe account claims he kept a dried toad in his mattress, for health, naturally, and yet, for all his ailments, James was sharp, dangerously so. He wrote treatises on witchcraft and divine right, translated psalms, and had opinions on just about everything, including how people should sleep. "Never lie on thy back too long, lest the humours rise to the head," he once told a courtier. "And always rise before the sun, for no man's soul is cleansed in sloth." Solid advice. Though, as you watch him now slumped sideways in a rather questionable fetal position, you wonder how often he took his own advice. His sleep was plagued with fears, not just of illness, but of plots. He'd seen his mother, Mary Queen of Scots, executed, grew up dodging daggers in the Scottish court. Even as king of a unified realm, he fretted over poison, Catholic uprisings, and of course, his daimonology was practically a bedtime story for himself, albeit one that kept him up all night. Historians still argue whether his obsession with witches was sincere belief or a political weapon, but there's no denying the man dreamed of them. Violent, detailed dreams. He once described being chased through a burning forest by a hag with 7 faces, one of which was his own. Another time, he woke claiming a dark bird had whispered secrets in Latin into his ear. That night, he burned 3 books. So yes, James slept lightly. Paranoia was his pillow. Even his guards were under orders not to walk outside his room at night, lest their footsteps interrupt his fragile rest. And heaven forbid anyone sneeze. There's a record of one servant being dismissed for noisy nose complaints. Tonight, though, he's quiet. Asleep, maybe, or just pretending, rehearsing a speech in his head, silently fuming over some bishop's grammar. You glance toward the bedside table. A copy of the King James Bible lies there, bound in leather, open to the Psalms. He was proud of that works, saw it as divine duty. You wonder if he reads it to calm himself before sleep, or if he simply stares at it, hoping to find something he didn't see the night before. A snore escapes him, not loud, but wet. He stirs, mutters, curls deeper into the sheets. He could be dreaming of Parliament, or of his son, Prince Henry, who died too young. That loss carved a deep line through James's soul, though he rarely spoke of it. Nearby, a candle gutters out, and the shadows pull closer. You feel them, heavy against the walls. Not malicious, just heavy. Sleep here is not restful. It's anxious, controlled. No tossing, no turning. Just a rigid surrender, like someone negotiating with the night, rather than embracing it. You step back into the gloom. The king does not wake. His crown sits nearby, not flashy, just polished gold. Clean, controlled, much like the man himself, buried under fabric and fears, trying to outsleep his ghosts. You pause at the door, glance once more at the motionless figure on the bed. Then you ease out, past the guards who pretend not to breathe, through corridors that smell of ink and pine smoke, and into the darker halls beyond. The steward line will go on, and so will the insomnia. You walk now through a palace of mirrors, not metaphorical ones, actual, polished, gilded, ridiculous mirrors on walls, on ceilings, even tucked into the furniture. The air is thick with perfume, and the corridors echo with the hush of velvet slippers. Versailles, late 17th century. You're in the sun-drenched world of Louis XIV, the Sun King, and tonight, you're witnessing a royal bedtime that is less a private ritual and more a public performance. No, really. The coucher du roi, the king's official going-to-bed ceremony, was an event, attended, watched, applauded. You arrive just in time for the tail end of it. The chamber is crowded with noblemen, fidgeting in silence as Louis XIV, in his embroidered dressing gown, finishes saying his a valet removes one shoe. A duke holds a candle. A bishop murmurs something about divine right and correct posture, and all the while the king nods, sighs, raises a brow here, adjusts a ribbon there, performing being tired like it's a role in an opera. Eventually, the crowd retreats, as if the very air obeys some silent signal. The doors close. Only a few trusted attendants remain. And now finally you get to see the king actually rest. Or try to. Louis's bed is absurd. Gigantic, raised like a throne, swathed in golden fabric, and watched over by golden cherubs who definitely know too much. It takes a full footstool, 2 steps, and a little hop for him to climb in. You expect trumpets. There aren't any, but they wouldn't feel out of place. This is the same bed where he was born, the same bed where he'll eventually die. But tonight, it's just where he tries to sleep off being the literal center of France. Louis was meticulous about sleep. He rose and rested by strict schedule, every hour accounted for. Historians still argue whether he truly enjoyed this structure, or simply feared what unstructured time might reveal. Either way, the Sun King slept like a soldier, regimented, disciplined, and with one eye open. You watch as he adjusts the heavy silk sheets. He prefers to sleep slightly. Elevated helps with digestion. So they say. A mild breeze from a concealed vent flutters one curtain, and a flicker of something human crosses his face. Exhaustion, relief, nobody ever asks, even at rest. He is on display. You'll enjoy this fringe detail. Louis often kept a secret stash of bonbons near his bedside note for indulgence, but for moments of low energy in the night. There's a rumor that once he fell asleep with a sugar almond still in his mouth, and it caused a minor court crisis. A valet tried to remove it with tongs. We'll leave it at that. His chamber smells of lavender, beeswax, and the faintest hint of powder. No pets are allowed. No mess. Everything must be perfect, controlled, glimmering. This isn't just a bedroom. It's a monument. But that doesn't mean Louis always slept well. He was a hypochondriac, deeply afraid of illness. He bathed rarely, fearing that water opened the pores to disease, and often slept wearing more layers than medically recommended. And then there were the dreams. Louis feared assassination, not just by dagger or poison, but by sorcery. He consulted astrologers, had his sheets blessed, and, according to one very nervous maid, once demanded an exorcism because of a recurring dream of wolves with velvet paws. This was never a relaxed man. Even now, tucked into a bed made for legends, he lies stiff, hands folded, breathing slow but alert. It's like he doesn't trust the sleep, or the bed, or the silence. His nightly ritual ends with a muttered prayer, something about France, glory, and stomach ailments. Then the curtains are drawn, not just one layer, 3. Privacy inside, privacy, velvet, lace, and damask. It's like trying to sleep inside a decorative cake. You watch from the corner as the final candle is extinguished. Darkness settles, thick and royal, and in that quiet, you begin to hear something strange. A whisper, not a voice. A rustle, like 1,000 tiny thoughts, pacing just outside the edge of sleep. Louis twitches, a foot flexes, one finger curls. He is not dreaming, yet he is fighting the dreams. The weight of court, of expectations, of mirrors and mantles and suns and wars, all of it pressing down like another blanket. Still, he does sleep, eventually, and when he does, he dreams of gardens. No battlefields, no thrones, just trimmed hedges and fountains that obey. It's the only place he truly controls, where the flowers don't argue and the birds never plot treason. Historians still argue whether this obsession with order was brilliance or insecurity. But in his dreams, the hedges are perfect. He shifts now, settles, breathes in deeply, and sees a real sigh this time. Not rehearsed, just tired. Outside, Versailles slumbers uneasily, beneath a sky too big to control. The fountains are off, the courtiers are gone. Even the mirrors seem to dim slightly, as if taking the night off from all that reflecting. You ease out of the golden chamber, careful not to rattle a floorboard. Not because you'll be caught, but because even kings deserve one unbroken hour of sleep. You've crossed the channel again. And this time, the air carries a different weightless gold. More grit. The 18th century has arrived, and with it, a shift in royal identity. No more divine glimmer. No sun kings or velvet wolves. Here, monarchy comes with anxiety, expectation, and if you're unluckier, guillotine just over the horizon. You're in London now. Buckingham House, before it was called Palace. The walls are simpler, the halls quieter, and the throne more uncertain. It's the reign of King George III, and tonight he is not well. You slip into the royal apartments and find a man pacing, not sleeping, not even trying. He mutters as he walks, hands twitching at invisible thoughts, eyes glassy from hours of being too awake. A nearby footman stiffens when George passes, uncertain whether he'll be asked for a quill, a scripture, or a shovel. Because when George III doesn't sleep, the entire court walks on glass. The bed is untouched. Grand enough, yes, but tonight it might as well be made of stone. Its sheets are crisp, corners tucked with military precision, as if sleep could be summoned by symmetry alone. George pauses near it, stares at it, and then keeps moving, like a man circling a trap he himself set. He hasn't always been like this. Years ago, he was known for his routine early to bed, early to rise. He preferred plain food, simple habits, and earnest Protestant prayers whispered beneath woolen sheets. He even dismissed some court luxuries, saying they made sleep less honest. That's an 18th century way of saying this mattress is trying too hard. But something in his mind has shifted. A chemical rebellion, a kind of waking dream that won't end. These are the early signs of what history will call madness, though that word hardly does it justice. Tonight, he speaks to the fireplace, then the curtain rod, then nothing at all. The court physicians have tried everything. Bleeding, purgatives, cold compresses, mineral tonics, and it worked once. But then came the nights where the king mistook the curtains for cloaked assassins, or began reciting entire parliamentary bills at 3 a.m., complete with footnotes. Here's your quirky detail for tonight. During one of his worst episodes, George reportedly spoke without pause for 58 hours straight. No sleep, no food, just a rolling tide of thoughts that flooded every room. The royal scribes gave up halfway through and started pretending to write, and still he fought for sleep. Tonight, you watch him try. He stands at the foot of the bed, muttering scripture under his breath. Psalms again. The kings of history really leaned on those. Then, slowly, as if trying not to wake the air, he lowers himself into bed. The mattress accepts him like it's not sure he belongs. He lies flat, too flat, hands across his chest, like he's bracing for judgment. His lips still move. The Lord is my shepherd. He trails off. Silence. Then, quietly, is he? You sit nearby. The fire pops. The shadows lengthen. He breathes deeply. In, out. You count the seconds. 4, 6, then a twitch, a wince. His foot spasms. He's still fighting something, dreams or doubts or chemicals, misfiring in the dark. Historians still argue whether George's illness was porphyria, bipolar disorder, or something else entirely. What's clear is that sleep became his enemy, not because he didn't want it, but because it refused to come cleanly. He turns onto his side, then he's back again. Then he whispers, "Tell Charlotte I'll try again tomorrow." Charlotte, his wife, his anchor. She sleeps in a separate wing now, not by choice, but by necessity. During George's worst spells, she was both terrified for him and terrified of him. She once wrote that she missed the quiet in his dreams, which sounds like something you'd find in a love letter if it weren't soaked in sorrow. Tonight, though, he is calmer than most. A small blessing, a single stillness in a year of storms. He closes his eyes, doesn't open them again right away, and slowly, his hands loosen their grip on the blanket. Sleep doesn't conquer him. It sneaks in, quietly, almost embarrassed. You stay a while longer, just in case. You watch the rise and fall of a man who ruled an empire, but couldn't always rule his own mind. The flickering shadows on his face soften. For now, he is not mad, not a king, just a man in a bed, chased by silence. Outside, London sighs. The carriages have stopped. The fog rolls in, and deep within the palace, the king, for once, is not speaking. He sleeps. The fog outside hasn't lifted, but it feels different now, colder, heavier. You've stepped into the 19th century, and the world has tilted once again. The age of empire is in full swing. Steam whistles echo in the distance, factories churn, and the British crown gleams like polished iron. You're in Windsor Castle now, and the corridors feel too wide, too quiet, like they're waiting for someone who won't come. Tonight, you visit Queen Victoria, not the stern-faced widow in statues or postage stamps. Not yet. Tonight, she's still very much alive, aging, yes, but not diminished. She lies in a chamber the size of a small cathedral, wrapped in layers of lace and wool, curtains drawn so tightly that it feels more like a tomb than a bedroom. She preferred it that way. Her bed is modest for a queen, but still regal. Solid mahogany high headboard, embroidered coverlet in deep burgundy and gold. The walls are hung with portraits. Her children, her ancestors, her Albert, especially Albert. He's everywhere. On the nightstand, a framed photo. On the dresser, his hairbrush, untouched. On the far wall, the nightshirt he last wore, preserved behind glass. You realize, slowly, that you're not in a queen's bedroom. You're in a shrine. Victoria never stopped mourning. Not really. After Prince Albert died in 1861, her world collapsed into shadow. She wore black for the rest of her life. She avoided public appearances. Even her sleep became an act of grief. She lies on the right side of the bed, always. The left side is left untouched, as if he might return and slide in beside her at any moment. The pillow is flat. The sheets are smoothed. Every night, a servant turns down the covers on his side too, as they did when he was alive. That's your fringe detail for tonight. For over 40 years, Victoria maintained Albert's bedtime routine. His hot water bottle was warmed. His pajamas were laid out, a ritual in absence. Historians still argue whether this was devotion, obsession, or simply survival. But to her, it was just love, enduring, heavy, relentless. Victoria's sleep was shallow in the years after his death. She wrote nightly in her journals, sometimes for hours. The pages are full of longing, regret, and occasionally for all his virtues, apparently snored like a walrus dragging a kettle. Even now, as she lies in bed, you can see the fatigue around her eyes. She's been queen for more than 50 years. Her empire spans continents, but her nights are haunted by a single absence. A clock ticks gently on the mantel. She doesn't like chimes, too jarring. The ticking is soft, like a whisper between each breath. She's not asleep yet, but she's close. Her maid has just left. The gas lights have been dimmed. A single candle remains on the nightstand. Its flame small but steady. The room smells faintly of lavender and pipe tobacco, Albert's favorite. She still requests it. Tonight, she clutches a handkerchief, folded 3 times. No embroidery, just cloth. She holds it close, not because she needs it, but because he once did. She turns slightly, then stills. Her eyes are closed now, but her lips move in silence. Maybe a prayer, maybe a memory, maybe something halfway between. You can almost feel her dreams forming thick with gardens, shadows, and soft German accents. In them, he walks beside her again, not as prince consort, not even as husband, but as something larger. Her anchor, her ghost. The physicians worry about her sleep. They prescribe cordials, tonics, and now, in her old age, a small glass of claret before bed. She drinks it dutifully, but it's the act, not the alcohol, that soothes her. There's no dog tonight. Her favorite spaniel, is long gone. Sometimes she lets the new one stay, but not tonight. Tonight is for silence, and here it comes. You hear her breathing deepen. The handkerchief slips from her fingers and lands gently on the coverlet. A long sigh follows one of those exhausted individe sighs that carries years behind it. She sleeps, and in sleep, she is not a widow or a queen. She is simply a woman who once loved someone so fiercely that the whole empire bent under its weight. You'd step back into the shadows. Outside, the fog curls tighter around the windows, but inside the chamber, there is stillness, a sacred, private stillness. You leave her to it. Outside, the carriages grow quieter, replaced by the distant hum of electricity. Gaslight gives way to filament bulbs. The crown still gleams, but now it shares a stage with factories, telegraphs, and restless headlines. You've reached the 20th century. Buckingham Palace, again, but it's different now. Modern, but cautious. Rego, but You're standing in the private quarters of King George VI, and tonight, he's not sleeping well. To be fair, he rarely does. The war has ended. Yes, but only just. London still smokes with memory. The palace windows are braced with blackout curtains, even though the bombs have stopped falling. Old habits die hard. George sits upright in bed, not yet ready to lie down. A single lamp casts a warm cone of light, catching the edge of a cigarette, trembling between his fingers. His dressing gown is neatly pressed, his slippers lined up beside the bed like soldiers at attention. He was never meant to be king. That was Edward's job. But Edward abdicated, and George Bertie to his family took the crown with clenched jaw and reluctant shoulders. He carried it anyway. He learned to rule in the rubble. His bedroom is simple, not austere, exactly, but nothing ostentatious. Floral wallpaper, a modest four-poster bed, one for him, one for Elizabeth. She's not here tonight, sleeping separately, as she often does when his nerves run high, because when George can't sleep, he paces. He tries not to. He reads, plays solitaire, listens to the wireless turned down so low it's mostly static. But eventually, the pacing wins. Tonight, he sits. You watch the cigarette smolder to the end before he stubs it out and leans back. His hands fidget with the edge of the blanket, smoothing and re-smoothing a wrinkle that isn't really there. He's thinking about speeches, always speeches. You can tell. George Vi had a stammer one that made every public address and every sleep, for him, was often the aftermath of the hours before were full of vocal exercises, deep breathing, tongue twisters whispered to an empty room. Your fringe fact tonight. He practiced lines from Shakespeare in the mirror to calm himself before bed, especially Henry V, once more unto the breach. Not just a speech, a mantra. Historians still argue whether his transformation during the war years was the result of training, trauma, or simply the desperate will to rise. But they agree on this. No king ever feared the microphone more, or braved it more bravely. He shifts now in bed, finally reclining. The sheets are cool. The room hums faintly with a newly installed radiator. His shoulders relax, but only a little. He turns on his side. His eyes drift toward the door. He senses he's waiting, not for danger, but for peace, for the world to stay quiet long enough that his own thoughts can't shout over it. Tonight, he's already reviewed the day's schedule twice in his head, mentally drafted a speech to Parliament, rewritten a telegram to Churchill, replayed an old conversation with his father, one that ended in silence and never got patched. And through it all, he wonders, will the girls be safe? Elizabeth and Margaret, his two daughters, still so young, still half in fairy tales and half in duty. He worries they'll never know a world that doesn't expect them to smile through rubble. And then he sighs, not theatrically, not for anyone, just one deep breath that seems to deflate the tension in his chest. You almost miss it, but it's there. The subtle shift from tension to rest. His hand unclenches, his brow softens. He doesn't dream much anymore, but when he does, it's usually about the Navy, the sea, back before the crown, before the stammer mattered. Just salt air, uniforms, and the honest exhaustion of a full day. You like that about him? He doesn't crave power, never did, but he shows up every day, every night. Even in dreams, he stands when others falter. Outside, a car passes on the gravel, a faint crackle from the wireless. Inside, the king sleeps, not dramatically, not symbolically, just sleeps. And for the first time tonight, so does the palace. The night smells different now, cleaner, quieter, like polished marble and central heating. You're in the late 20th century, and the monarchy no longer rules with swords or proclamations, but with cameras and carefully measured words. Windsor Castle again, or perhaps Balmoral. The Queen isn't one for telling you where she'll be, but wherever you are, you're in the private sanctuary of Elizabeth II, and tonight, the crown is already in bed. Elizabeth was never one to stay up unnecessarily. She doesn't linger in parlors or ramble through midnight halls like her ancestors. She is precise, tidy, clockwise in all things. So by the time you ease into her chamber, she's already in her nightgown, teeth brushed, dog beds arranged, and her reading glasses neatly folded on the table beside her. The Corgers are here, of course, at least 2, possibly 3. One of them is softly snoring. Her bed is large, but practical. None of the velvet hysteria of Louis XIV. It's warm, plain, and fitted with floral linens that look like they were selected from a sensible catalogue. And yet, something about it feels immovable, regal, simply because it knows it's the Queen's bed. Elizabeth lies still, propped by a firm pillow, her eyes moving across the last lines of her book. Something about horses, or World War II, or both. She's particular about her pre-sleep reading. No modern fiction, no fluff. If there are no footnotes, she's suspicious. She adjusts her glasses, sighs, and closes the book gently. Sleep does not evade her, the way it plagued others. But that doesn't mean her mind is ever still. She grew up during air raids, dodging debris with her sister Margaret, sleeping in bunkers, and reading letters from evacuated friends. Then she became queen in her 20s. No time for fragility. Her sleep, like her reign, is one of duty. Night after night, she has gone to bed knowing she will rise with the weight of a nation on her shoulders, and not a single word out of place. Tonight, as she slides deeper under the sheets, you feel the rhythm of her day unwind. Briefings, handshakes, ribbon, horse updates, constitutional puzzles, diplomatic smiles. They fall away like paper pages, turning backward through time. She exhales, slowly, eyes closed, face composed. Even in rest, she wears an expression of polite attentiveness, as though she's expecting someone to knock on the door with an urgent Commonwealth update. Here's your fringe detail. She slept with a bell on her nightstand, a small silver one, so she could ring for help or tea without raising her voice. She rarely used it, but it was always there, just in case. Historians still argue whether Elizabeth was truly comfortable in the role that fate handed her, or simply exceptional at inhabiting it. But in this quiet moment, there is no debate. She belongs here. There are no dramatics in her sleep. No thrashing or talking. No ghosts. No velvet paws. No dripping candles. If she dreams, they are quiet dreams of Balmoral mornings, of stables, of peaceful garden walks where no one has to curtsy. One of the corgis shifts, gives a little sneeze, then settles again. The Queen doesn't stir. She's gone now, properly asleep, shoulders level, breathing even. There's something remarkable about how completely unremarkable this scene is, because this is how she ruled, by doing the thing, every day, without the need to announce it. Her power was subtle, steady, like the ticking of the clock across the room, like the turning of seasons, like the quiet breath of a monarch who, at last, is off duty for the night. And still, the crown sits not far away, not on a velvet cushion, but inside a polished cabinet, tucked away like a family heirloom that must be taken out again at dawn. But for now, it rests too. You turn toward the door. It doesn't creak. The walls here are used to discretion. Outside, the world still swirls, tabloids, headlines, shifting government spot. Here, inside this quiet room, the monarch sleeps, unfussy, unshaken, uncrowned, but still queen. And now, at last, you arrive in the present. The marble underfoot is warmer, the light softer, cameras are tucked discreetly into corners. The ancient monarchy stands in a thoroughly modern world, buzzing fast, uncertain, and yet still, a king lies down to sleep beneath a crown that weighs the same as it did 500 years ago. Tonight, you're with Charles III. You pass through Highgrove, or perhaps Clarence House. It's hard to say. He keeps several homes, but his private quarters all feel similar. Books stacked neatly, fresh-cut flowers on the mantel, the air scented faintly with old wood and rosemary. Charles doesn't sleep in castles dripping with tapestries. His surroundings are elegant but personal, more scholar than sovereign. Art on the walls, notes in the margins of well-thumbed environmental reports, a half-drunk herbal infusion cooling beside a leather-bound notebook. You can tell he was writing before bed. He still does. Thoughts, reflections, unresolved lines of speeches. He once said he thinks best when the world is quiet and most people are asleep, which is probably why you find him still awake. He's pacing, slowly, not anxious, just winding down. A quiet rhythm, hands clasped behind his back, eyes soft with thought. You catch the whisper of his footsteps on the rug, the small sigh he gives as he stops to look out the window into the dark. Outside, nothing stirs, just moonlight across hedges. He probably pruned himself. Eventually, he climbs into bed. It's firm, no towering frame or dramatic embroidery, just soft linens, pressed smooth. A proper bed for someone who has waited a very long time to lie in it as king. He adjusts the pillow, settles into place, and then pauses. You see the hesitation in his eyes, a flicker, like someone remembering to be the role they now are. Charles has never been known as an easy sleeper. He's described himself as a restless thinker, the sort who wakes with ideas or worries or odd half-dreams involving sustainable urban planning. He's even admitted to talking in his sleep, once mumbling a full paragraph on hedgerow biodiversity at 2 a.m., much to Camilla's confusion. Tonight, though, he looks tired, and something more. Perhaps the weight of the role is finally beginning to settle across his shoulders in a different way now that it's not theoretical. He reaches over and turns off the bedside light. The room dips into darkness, and the familiar hum of modern life thermostats, smart clocks. Maybe a security monitor fades into the background. One of his dogs is. Even kings of rescued terriers lets out a faint puff of air at the foot of the bed, then resumes dreaming. And here's your quirky tidbit. Charles has been known to sleep with a pressed flower under his pillow. He claims it helps him remember to stay grounded. Whether it's true or symbolic, the thought lingers as he shifts under the covers and exhales, slowly. His crown isn't nearby. Not tonight. It's in a vault, perhaps, or a guarded room, gleaming in its lonely spotlight. It doesn't need to be close, because Charles carries the crown differently. More like a continuation than a coronation. His dreams tonight, if he dreams, are probably filled with tree planting schedules, diplomatic murmurs, and long walks through misty woodlands where no one asks for a photograph. Historians haven't written their arguments yet. They're still sharpening their pencils, still watching. But in this small, unguarded hour, there is no debate. This is a king at rest, not in marble halls or golden beds, not under trumpets or fanfare, but in a quiet room with soft sheets, a cooling cup of tea, and a mind still gently worried through the dark. He closes his eyes, he breathes, and at last he sleeps.